The crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow across the ballroom as I stood at the edge of the stage, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed down my navy blue evening gown. The annual Aegis Cybernetics Gala was in full swing, with hundreds of investors, tech leaders, and journalists filling the opulent Seattle Four Seasons ballroom. Tonight was supposed to be my night. The Tech CEO of the Year award sat gleaming on the podium, waiting for me to claim it. Aegis had just hit $100 million valuation, and I was 34 years old, leading a cybersecurity company that was revolutionizing how corporations protected their digital assets. I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror behind the bar and barely recognized the confident woman staring back at me. It had been such a long journey from that awkward 16-year-old girl who spent her nights coding in her bedroom while her father dismissed her computer games as a phase. Now, here I was, about to be recognized as one of the most innovative leaders in tech. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father, Arthur Vance, was sitting in the front row, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing his signature $1,000 suit. He had flown in from his real estate empire headquarters for this moment, and despite everything, part of me still craved his approval. The master of ceremonies announced my name, and I began walking toward the stage when suddenly Arthur rose from his seat. My blood turned cold as he strode past me, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in what might have looked like a paternal gesture to the audience but felt like a claim of ownership to me. He took the microphone with the easy confidence of a man who had spent decades commanding boardrooms and bending others to his will. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur's voice boomed across the ballroom, that familiar timbre that had terrified me as a child and still made my stomach clench. Aegis Cybernetics has achieved incredible success under the innovative leadership of my daughter, Evelyn. But to conquer the IPO summit and become a billion-dollar empire, we need a leader with business vision, connections, and the backbone of a true man. The words hit me like physical blows. I stood frozen at the foot of the stage, watching my life's work being diminished to mere stepping stones for someone else's ambition. The champagne flute in my hand seemed to grow heavier as Arthur's gaze swept across the room with practiced authority. Therefore, I am extremely proud to announce the new CEO of Aegis Cybernetics, Arthur continued, his smile sharp as a blade. My son, Leo Vance. The crash of crystal hitting marble barely registered over the roar of blood in my ears. My champagne glass had slipped from my numb fingers, shattering into 1,000 pieces that sparkled like my dreams under the ballroom lights. Camera flashes exploded around me as Leo emerged from the crowd, his expensive suit tailored to perfection, his smile radiating the kind of entitled confidence that came from never having to earn anything. He embraced Arthur on stage while I stood there like a statue, watching my company, my life's work, my identity being handed over to my incompetent younger brother like a birthday present. The applause thundered around me, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking. Years of sacrifice, innovation, and relentless dedication had just been erased in a single moment of public humiliation. This wasn't just a business decision, it was a declaration that I would never be enough in my father's eyes simply because I wasn't born with a Y chromosome. The betrayal had roots that stretched back to my childhood, but I had always told myself that success would eventually earn me the respect I deserved. When I was 16, I had stayed up for 3 consecutive nights building a rudimentary AI chatbot that could learn from conversations. I was so proud of my creation that I burst into Arthur's study at midnight, my eyes red with exhaustion but bright with excitement. He barely glanced up from his financial reports. Girls should focus on more delicate pursuits, he had said, his tone suggesting I had just shown him a finger painting instead of a glimpse into the future of artificial intelligence. Leave the technical stuff to the men, sweetheart. That same year, Leo crashed Arthur's Mercedes while driving drunk at 14. Instead of consequences, Leo received a brand new BMW and a pat on the shoulder. A man needs a little recklessness in his blood, Arthur had declared, as if nearly killing 3 pedestrians was a rite of passage rather than a crime. I earned a full scholarship to Stanford for computer science, but Arthur complained about the astronomical living costs in California when I asked for help with basic expenses. Meanwhile, Leo stumbled through 6 years at a mediocre business school, his path smoothed by Arthur's donations and connections. When Leo finally graduated, Arthur threw a massive party and proclaimed that credentials don't matter as much as the relationships they build. I had graduated summa cum laude from one of the world's top universities, but Leo's barely passing grades from a regional college were somehow more valuable because they came attached to a golf club membership and fraternity connections. After Stanford, I worked for 3 years at a prestigious tech firm, saving every penny while living in a studio apartment that barely had room for a bed and desk. I ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I cared to count, also I could accumulate the capital needed to start Aegis. When I finally took the leap, Arthur's response was predictably dismissive. Another tech startup pipe dream, he had said when I called to share my excitement about incorporating the company. When you're ready to do something serious with your life, let me know. The first 2 years of Aegis were a masterclass in rejection and humiliation. Venture capitalists would listen politely to my presentations before explaining why a young woman with no management experience wasn't worth their investment. One particularly memorable investor actually laughed in my face and said, "A girl with an idea isn't a business, sweetheart. Come back when you have a real team." That's when I met Isabella Rossi, a brilliant former CTO who had been forced out of her own company by an all-male board of directors despite leading the development of 3 industry-changing products. Isabella saw herself in my story, and she became more than an investor, she became the mentor I had always needed. Her investment of $2 million came with something even more valuable, decades of hard-won wisdom about surviving in a male-dominated industry. "They'll try to break you down piece by piece," Isabella told me over coffee in her penthouse office overlooking Elliott Bay. "The key is to make yourself indispensable while building walls they can't climb over. Document everything, own your intellectual property, and never let them see you as anything less than essential." Under Isabella's guidance, Aegis secured its first major contract with a Wall Street bank that was hemorrhaging money due to a massive security breach. My team and I worked 48 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination, to plug the holes in their system and implement a revolutionary new defense protocol. The success made headlines in the financial press and established Aegis as a serious player in cybersecurity. That's when Leo came calling, or rather, when Arthur decided Leo needed a job. My brother's own consulting company had failed spectacularly, leaving him with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. Arthur used his usual emotional manipulation, claiming his health was declining and that he wanted to see his children working together before he died. Against my better judgment and Isabella's explicit warnings, I agreed to bring Leo on as Director of External Relations. The decision haunted me almost immediately. Leo wasn't just incompetent, he was actively destructive. During his first month, he leaked details about our upcoming product launch to a woman he was dating who happened to work for our biggest competitor. I discovered the breach through our security monitoring and had to spend 3 sleepless nights developing an entirely new product demonstration and marketing strategy to stay ahead of the stolen information. When I confronted Leo about the leak, he shrugged with the casual indifference of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "She seemed genuinely interested in the technology," he said, as if industrial espionage was just another form of pillow talk. "I was trying to network." Things got worse from there. Leo began taking credit for deals that my core team had spent months developing. When Ben Carter, my brilliant head engineer, and I closed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company after 6 months of negotiations, Leo somehow managed to convince Arthur that his relationship building had been the decisive factor. The internal tension this created nearly cost me Ben and Priya Sharma, my operations director, both of whom had been with me since the beginning. "I didn't sign up to watch some entitled brat take credit for my work," Ben told me during a heated discussion in my office. "If this is how things are going to be, maybe I should start looking elsewhere." I managed to smooth things over with both Ben and Priya by giving them equity stakes and written guarantees about their roles, but the incident was a warning sign I should have heeded. Leo was like a cancer in the organization, spreading dysfunction and resentment wherever he went. Yet every time I tried to address his behavior with Arthur, my father would dismiss my concerns as sibling rivalry or suggest that I was being overly emotional about business decisions. The night of the gala, as I stood in the private conference room adjacent to the ballroom, facing my father and brother, the full scope of their betrayal became crystal clear. The room was decorated with photos from Aegis's biggest achievements, patents I had developed, awards I had won, headlines celebrating innovations I had created. Yet here I was, being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own success story. "You turned my life's work into a cheap theater production to prop up his incompetence," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "Why?" Arthur's expression was cold, businesslike, the same look he had worn when firing employees or crushing competitors. "Because he's my son. He carries the Vance name. My legacy needs to be inherited by a man. You're a talented creator, Evelyn, but you're not a leader. You're too emotional." Leo smirked from his position beside Arthur, his confidence as unearned as everything else he had ever received. "You should just accept it, Evelyn. This is what's best for the company." The audacity of that statement nearly made me laugh. Leo thought he could lecture me about what was best for a company he had nearly destroyed multiple times through his carelessness and incompetence. But instead of anger, I felt something else settling over me like armor, absolute clarity. "You've made a fatal mistake, Arthur," I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. "You think you're taking my company away from me, but you have no idea what actually makes it valuable." I turned to Leo, my expression serene despite the chaos in my heart. "Congratulations on your new position. Enjoy the CEO chair while you can, because it won't stay warm for long." As I walked out of that conference room, leaving them with their triumph and their ignorance, I felt lighter than I had in years. They had no idea what was coming, but I had spent the last 5 years preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. Isabella's lessons about protecting myself had been thorough, and I had implemented every single one of them. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office as she pulled out a thick folder marked Prometheus Protocol. This was my insurance policy, a legal mechanism I had built into Aegis's founding documents that Arthur and Leo had never bothered to understand. All of Aegis's core intellectual property, the patents and algorithms that made the company valuable, were owned by me personally and licensed to the company under one specific condition: I had to remain CEO. The moment you were removed from your position, all licensing agreements became void, my lawyer explained with a smile. Aegis can continue to exist as a corporate entity, but it can't legally use any of the technology that makes it profitable. While Arthur and Leo were still celebrating their coup, I was already implementing the second phase of my plan. I had spent years building relationships with my core team based on mutual respect and shared vision rather than family obligation or financial coercion. When I called Ben, Priya, and CFO Clara Hayes that evening, they were ready to move. "I've been expecting this call for months," Clara told me. "Leo's been running around the office like he owns the place, and morale has been in free fall. Half the engineering team has been updating their resumes." By sunrise the next day, Leo arrived at the Aegis office to find his inbox flooded with resignation letters. I had submitted my formal resignation, taking my intellectual property with me. Ben, Priya, Clara, and 15 of our best engineers had all tendered their notices simultaneously. In the span of 12 hours, Aegis had gone from a cutting-edge technology company to an empty shell with a confused CEO who didn't understand the products he was supposedly leading. The third phase of my plan involved our clients, and this was where Arthur's business acumen should have protected him, if he had bothered to read the contracts I had negotiated. Every major client agreement included what I call key person clauses, guaranteeing that I would personally oversee their cybersecurity implementations. These weren't just legal formalities, they were relationships I had built through late-night crisis management and innovative problem-solving that had saved my clients millions of dollars. Within 48 hours of leaving Aegis, I had announced the formation of Nova Century. 3 of our largest clients, representing 60% of Aegis's revenue, terminated their contracts and signed preliminary agreements with my new company. The technology industry is small and gossip travels fast. Word of my departure and the circumstances behind it spread through Silicon Valley like wildfire. The narrative that emerged was irresistible to both the tech press and the broader business media: a brilliant female CEO betrayed by family greed, only to rise from the ashes stronger than before. The story had everything journalists loved: sexism, corporate intrigue, technological innovation, and a protagonist that readers could root for. Nova Century's launch announcement garnered more positive press coverage than Aegis had received in its entire 5-year existence. Meanwhile, Aegis was hemorrhaging value by the hour. Without the core technology and the team that understood it, Leo was essentially running a cybersecurity company that couldn't provide cybersecurity services. In a desperate attempt to prove himself, he hired a cut-rate development team to reverse engineer my algorithms and create new defensive protocols. The results were predictable and catastrophic. Within 3 weeks of taking over, Leo's new systems failed spectacularly during a coordinated attack on Meridian Financial, Aegis's largest remaining client. The breach exposed the personal information of over 2 million customers and cost Meridian hundreds of millions in regulatory fines and lawsuit settlements. The scandal made national news, with Leo's face plastered across financial magazines under headlines like "The billion-dollar mistake and when nepotism goes wrong." As Aegis crumbled, a new threat emerged that Arthur hadn't anticipated. Damian Croft, my father's longtime rival in Seattle's real estate market, recognized an opportunity when he saw one. Croft had been circling Arthur's empire for years, looking for signs of weakness, and the Aegis disaster was exactly the opening he needed. He began acquiring Aegis stock from panicked investors while simultaneously launching hostile takeover bids for several of Arthur's real estate properties. Arthur, who had spent decades building his reputation as an untouchable business titan, suddenly found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts. The man who had orchestrated my public humiliation was now facing his own very public downfall, and the irony was delicious. 6 months after the gala, Arthur appeared at Nova Century's offices looking like a ghost of his former self. His usual confidence had been replaced by the haunted expression of a man watching his life's work crumble in real time. He asked to speak with me privately, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in the same conference room where he had once stripped me of my CEO title, but now the power dynamic had completely reversed. Arthur sat across from me like a supplicant, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while I remained standing behind the head of the table. "I need you to buy Aegis," he said without preamble, his voice lacking its usual authority. "Croft is going to destroy everything if you don't intervene. The Vance name will be finished." I had been anticipating this moment for months, but hearing the desperation in my father's voice still sent a complex mix of emotions through me. Part of me wanted to savor his humiliation, while another part felt a twinge of the old desire to please him. But mostly, I felt the cold satisfaction of a chess player who had been planning this endgame since the opening move. "I'll consider it," I said, letting the silence stretch between us. "But I have terms." I placed a contract on the table between us. "I'll purchase Aegis's remaining assets for $1. Arthur's face went white, but he nodded slowly. He understood that he had no leverage left and no alternatives. "There's one additional condition," I continued, sliding a second document across the table. "You'll sign this public admission of wrongdoing, acknowledging that you manipulated the board of directors, made catastrophic leadership decisions, and appointed an unqualified CEO who caused irreparable damage to the company. This statement will be distributed to every major business publication in the country." Arthur stared at the papers for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't bring himself to speak. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes: sign the confession and salvage what remained of his empire, or refuse and watch Croft burn everything to the ground. "You're asking me to destroy my reputation," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm asking you to acknowledge what you've already done. Your reputation destroyed itself the moment you chose ego over competence." With shaking hands, Arthur signed both documents. The next morning, his confession was front-page news in the Wall Street Journal, and business schools would spend the next decade using the Aegis case study to teach about the dangers of nepotism and gender bias in corporate leadership. I officially merged Aegis's remaining assets into Nova Century that afternoon. Standing in my old office, watching maintenance workers remove the Aegis cybernetics signage and install the Nova Century logo, I felt a profound sense of completion. The girl who had been told that technical innovation was men's work had built a company that was now valued at over $500 million. The daughter who had been publicly humiliated for the crime of being born female had transformed that humiliation into the fuel for something greater than her father could have ever imagined. Leo disappeared from public view after the merger, his brief moment as CEO having permanently damaged his prospects in the business world. Arthur managed to salvage a portion of his real estate empire, but he never recovered the influence and respect he had once commanded. The Vance name, which he had been so desperate to preserve through male inheritance, would now be remembered primarily for one of the most spectacular corporate failures in Seattle's history. As for me, I found that revenge was less sweet than I had anticipated, but justice felt exactly as satisfying as I had hoped. I had learned that the most powerful form of vindication wasn't crushing your enemies, it was succeeding so completely that their betrayal became irrelevant. Nova Century continued to grow, attracting the best talent in cybersecurity and developing innovations that pushed the industry forward. I also discovered that the relationships built on mutual respect and shared values were infinitely more valuable than blood ties polluted by resentment and disappointment. Ben, Priya, and Claire became not just my business partners but my chosen family, the people who saw my worth without needing to be convinced or coerced. Isabella often reminded me that the best revenge is a life well lived, and as I looked out over the Seattle skyline from my corner office, I understood what she meant. I hadn't just reclaimed my company, I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth and my faith in my own judgment. The legacy of the betrayer wasn't the empire he had tried to steal from me, it was the stronger, wiser, more confident woman I had become in the process of taking it back. The most unexpected gift of the whole experience was the realization that my father's approval had never been worth pursuing in the first place. I had spent decades trying to earn validation from a man whose values were fundamentally incompatible with my own. His betrayal had freed me from that futile quest and allowed me to build something much more valuable, a life and career based on my own definitions of success. Years later, when young entrepreneurs would ask me for advice about dealing with family pressure or gender discrimination in business, I would tell them what Isabella had taught me: make yourself indispensable, protect your intellectual property, and never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you know you are. Most importantly, I would remind them that sometimes the greatest gift your enemies can give you is the motivation to prove them wrong. The betrayer's legacy, as it turned out, belonged entirely to me.